everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I am Daita Sergi, Education Programs Manager with AASHE, and I'll be the moderator today. It is my pleasure to welcome you all. As many of you know, AASHE's mission is to inspire and catalyze higher education to lead the global sustainability transformation. We are an international association with about 1,000 members, spread across more than 20 countries, including Finland and Qatar. We serve as the professional home for campus sustainability staff, but we offer resources for everyone in higher education. We provide an expansive collection of online resources, networking tools, such as today's webinar, and an annual conference and expo, which will be held in Pittsburgh, October 2nd to the 5th. Registration is open and prices go up on August 1st, so make sure to register now to join us in Pittsburgh. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Everyone in the audience is on mute, but please feel free to ask questions or provide comments at any point during the presentation. You can do that by typing your questions or comments in the questions pane in the control panel on your screen. If you have additional questions, please email them to education@aashe.org and we will get back to you. At the end of the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to provide feedback regarding today's presentation. We take your suggestions into account when planning for future webinars, so please do provide this feedback. Please note this webinar is being recorded. If you experience technical difficulties or have to leave early, you and others can view the recording later. The recording and presentation materials will all be available in the Campus Sustainability Hub after the live broadcast. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Grace Prosavsky started the Natural Herbicides project through the Georgia Tech chapter of Engineers for a Sustainable World in 2014, based on research she had conducted in 2012, for which she was recognized internationally as a Google Science Fair finalist, Scientific American Science in Action finalist, and Global +5 finalist. Maranda Ilinca Bârlea is a third-year undergraduate student at Georgia Tech, majoring in chemical and biomolecular engineering with a biotechnology concentration. She joined the Engineers for a Sustainable World Natural Herbicides project team this year, and her contribution is by searching scientific literature for the toxic effects of traditional chemical herbicides and helping prepare a poster presentation on the natural herbicides developed by the team. More information about the presenters is found on the AASHE website under this webinar listing. It is my pleasure to welcome all attendees and thank you for joining us today. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to Ilinca to get us started. Ilinca?
Hello, my name is Ilinca and I am a member of the Natural Herbicides team. I will be speaking briefly about why we choose our natural herbicide over chemical herbicides. The problem of weed management has serious consequences. Firstly, weeds are problems in agriculture for crops. They compete with native plant species and take their resources for resources and have negative effects on populations of native plants. In order to address this issue, herbicides are used in large quantities in the United States as well as all over the world. 825 million kilograms of toxic glyphosate-based herbicides have been used per year, and these leave residual chemicals on crops such as soybeans, corn, wheat, and cotton. These are problems that affect the health of humans. Studies have shown that chemical herbicides are linked with health defects such as heart and craniofacial abnormalities, increased cancer risks, as well as ADHD and other forms of DNA damage in humans. In addition to the harmful health effects on humans, there are environmental side effects such as water pollution, soil residues, and harm to pollinators, which decreases biodiversity. One of the ways in which chemical herbicides decrease biodiversity. Chemical herbicide usage has led to desynchronized natural biological patterns in nature, such as butterfly migration patterns.
So we tested a combination of different ingredients showing herbicidal potential. So these were substances that had the type of qualities that were likely to result in killing weeds. And we tried out a combination of these different substances and different adjuvants or additives that could help them to adhere better to weeds. And what we came up with was that a combination of acetic acid from vinegar and D-limonene from orange oil was really a lot more effective than any of the substances individually or any other different combination. And this was important because these were all natural substances. They didn't have all the detrimental environmental impacts of chemical herbicides. D-limonene is a food grade substance. This FDA approved, is safe for human consumption. Acetic acid is found in household vinegar. And the substance worked a lot better than natural herbicides currently on the market, which is important because it's schools need and most people need a cost-effective solution, and the high cost of natural herbicides that are currently available prohibits people from actually really using them. So on this slide, we have a description of the ingredients of our solution that we found to be effective and how to make it. And if your school is interested in using this or trying to get your landscape services to use this, we would be more than happy to provide you with a detailed guide of how to make the solution. We've tested it on a variety of different weeds, basically all the weeds that we found on the lawn at our school, Georgia Tech, and found it to be very effective, as you can see in the picture on the bottom. After just a couple of hours, if you apply our solution thoroughly to the weed, it goes from being alive and green to being wilted up and brown, and eventually will kind of disintegrate where you can't see it anymore. Okay, so our solution is a direct replacement to glyphosate, which is a probable carcinogen. Glyphosate is the main ingredient of Roundup, which is a very commonly used chemical herbicide. It's quite likely that your landscape service department, like our landscape services department, uses Roundup commonly in large quantities to maintain campus lawns. Natural herbicides may temporarily alter the pH of soil, but they don't cause any long-term changes, making them a lot safer. They also don't harm pollinators and they don't have residual effects in water and end up being harmful to human health, as we previously talked about. And we've also found that if you buy concentrated vinegar and D-limonene, you can make the solution for $15.74, which is only a little bit more than the Roundup, and that's not even buying the ingredients in bulk. So if you made this on a large scale, you'd be able to make this for an even more affordable price compared to traditional natural herbicides, which are about $20, so a lot more expensive. And it's also very simple and easy to make. All right, so we want to give you a brief overview of how we implemented this research on effective natural herbicides and implemented this knowledge that there was this effective natural solution to try to make a difference on campus and in the community. And so the first thing we did is conducted tests on plots at Georgia Tech. So we basically we got approval from our landscape service department to do a trial where we maintained a plot of land on campus using all sustainable methods and to demonstrate that it did work and was effective. We also educated local growers on the harmful impacts of chemical herbicides and how they can use our solution and other natural solutions as an alternative. We provided samples of our natural herbicide to these growers. We developed a partnership program through which we could work with them on doing sustainable weed control. We taught a class session on how to use natural herbicides through a program our college has called the Excel program, where they provide classes to students with special needs. And they had a class on gardening for these students, so we gave a class session on using safe and natural herbicides. And then Alinka is going to give a brief overview of different outreach initiatives that she's done while she was leading the project at Georgia Tech. And then after that, we're going to give some tips about how you can lead projects at your school and how you can get your school to transition to natural herbicides. So I'll pass it on to Alinka.
Last fall, our school held the first facility sustainability forum where representatives from the facilities department at Georgia Tech attended, and they spoke about sustainability initiatives within their department, such as recycling initiatives and processing dead leaves in such a way that helps nourish the soil. At this facilities forum, we met with some Georgia Tech landscaping staff who talked a little bit about the work that they do. And the sustainability forum was also an opportunity to learn about soil health, which was relevant to our topic. So after speaking with them and connecting with them at the facilities forum, we reached out to them via email, and the turf maintenance manager set up a meeting with me where we talked about how the campus currently manages how the campus does weed control, and also the herbicides that they use. The turf manager was interested in using the herbicide, and a month later, we provided them with instructions on how to make it, as well as with ingredients for the herbicide. They were not able to test it in the fall due to poor weather, as the herbicide is best applied when it is sunny outside and when there's not a lot of precipitation. So then the maintenance team tried it out in early February, and the results were not what they were hoping for. They're willing to try it again when the weather is more permissible. So that was a valuable experience for us to learn that it is best to wait for the landscaping team to apply it when it is sunny and when the herbicide has the best potential to work at its optimum.
All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about what we've done in the past, and Linka just gave some details on how we've worked with landscape services, we want to try to make that applicable to you guys and talk about how y'all can work with your campus landscape services to get them to transition to using sustainable weed control methods. So first, we're going to talk about how to develop the relationship with landscape services so that you can get them to actually consider this and get them to work to want to use natural weed control methods. Of course, this will be a little bit different for you guys since y'all are sustainability professionals, whereas we were students. But as Alinka just talked about, it was really valuable to attend sustainability forums where landscape services people might be present and talk to them there, because then you're talking to the people who already care about sustainability. You already have that common ground. You're building off of that. Another way to, I guess, start developing the relationship, which is in what we did and what I did for our first project with landscape services, is just figured out who the director was and reached out to the director in email saying, hey, I really appreciate everything that you're doing for sustainability, and I have an idea to help y'all to move even farther towards sustainability. And I'd say that I was wondering if you'd be willing to discuss your current weed control practices so we can figure out how sustainable they are and if there's any way that you can move forward and making them more sustainable. Okay, so first I want to talk about give more detail on how to conduct a project with landscape services, like the first project that we conducted at Georgia Tech, which is a weed control trial on a small plot of land on campus. We started off with this because it seemed a lot more feasible to propose to landscape services that that we would maintain a plot of campus land than land across the entire campus. And it also it's a good way to just demonstrate to landscape services the natural herbicide solution can be effective. Because you can show them, like, look, we're maintaining this small area of land on campus using organic weed control, and it still looks good. And there's less risk to landscape services and letting you maintain a small plot of land using organic weed control, because you can put up a sign saying, like, this is a pesticide-free zone. You can basically, like, make it very clear this is a trial project, so then it doesn't reflect poorly on the university. So how we approached this is we had a student team that was conducting the weed control trial and managing the plot of land on campus using organic methods. And so then the landscape services wasn't doing any of the work. They're basically just getting a team of students maintaining this plot of land for free, which isn't also probably made it a little bit more appealing to them. So we would suggest that as sustainability professionals, you reach out to students and set this up like a volunteer project or something like that, and say, like, we're looking for a volunteer student team to maintain a plot of land on campus sustainably. It would also be a good idea, which is something we also did, to find a faculty member who'd be interested in, like, helping mentor the student team and and sponsoring or showing their support for this project. So then, and then when you write your proposal to landscape services, you can say, this is sponsored by this faculty member. We have a team of students who'd be willing to help implement this trial, and we just basically need your approval for this to happen on a small area of campus land. So we found it helpful to approach this by writing a fairly formal and detailed proposal to landscape services, so that they're able to take us seriously and able to believe we actually could maintain this plot of land. Again, in the proposal, we started off by thanking them for their commitment to sustainability, and then we also really found it really important to emphasize how much this project is beneficial to students and the school. So we said, like, we mentioned the health impacts of herbicides and how those can impact students, how the institution is, in our case, we said our institution is committed to advancing sustainability through innovative means. So we said the project would fit really well in the institution's goals. And then in your proposal, you could also say that, like, a similar project to this worked really well at Georgia Tech, and students were able to successfully maintain a plot of land. It worked out well for the university, and we can give you more information on that. And then in your proposal, it's also good to identify, like, plots of land on campus that you think could be ideal for this project. We found that it was best to try to find a plot of land that was medium visibility and medium size. Medium visibility because schools are concerned about kids and parents visiting on tours and seeing a plot of land, area of land that might not be maintained up to their normal standards, or that landscape services just, like, doesn't really have control over. So they might be a little paranoid about letting students maintain a super high visibility area, because they'll be worried, like, what if they don't do a good job? And parents who are touring the campus see that. So I think a medium visibility area is ideal because of that, but also because you don't want to do, like, a super remote area on campus, because you do want some people to see this area and to see, like, oh, this area is being effectively maintained organically. And then a medium-sized area is ideal because you want it to be something that's feasible for students to maintain and do a good job at. So if you do a really large area, it will make the logistics of the project a lot more difficult, and it'll increase the likelihood that it doesn't end up working out that well. Another thing that I think is good to suggest to both, like, alleviate concerns of the Landscape Services Department that poor maintenance of this plot could reflect poorly on them, and just to provide, like, publicity for the fact that for that organic weed control methods work is putting up a sign that says pesticide-free zone, because that will start a conversation where people come by the land and they'll be like, oh, like what's different about this plot of land? And they'll notice it and be like, okay, so this land wasn't maintained using pesticides, and they'll notice it. Okay, wow, this plot of land still looks good in spite of that. So that's kind of good. Both offers some reassurance and it's pretty good publicity, and starts the conversation about organic weed control. We also suggest in your proposal outlining a very detailed plan saying what the SNP student team will be doing, what different tasks they'll be performing, and when they'll be performing them to ensure the land is maintained, because that kind of thing also gives a lot of assurance to landscape services and makes them not feel like they're just pawning this off to people who don't know what they're doing. So here I just kind of provided an outline of a sample detailed weed control plan and what that could involve. So this is what we did and what we would suggest that you also would do or have your student team do. At the outset of the project, we performed soil testing to see what type of nutrients were deficient in the soil, because healthy soil is very important to discouraging weed growth and encouraging the growth of plants that you want to be growing there. And then on a weekly basis, every Monday and Wednesday, we would perform spot treatment of the natural herbicide. So what that basically means is we would have members of our student team spray the herbicide only on the plants that they wanted to kill and not on the surrounding grass, because the herbicide will kill everything. So you have to only apply it to the plants, to the weeds that you want to kill. And then we also recorded data in a weed log, which will show a picture on next slide, and in the software system called the Weed Information Management System. And this is really important because then you have a record of how the solution is working, how levels of weeds are going down due to the natural weed control methods. And then every Friday we would check the quality of the site to make sure that it was up to landscape services standards, because that's really important to make sure that this project that it shows that organic weed control methods are working. If there are any persistent weeds, we would remove them using Fisker's hand weeding tool, because that's a part of any weed control plan, even those using chemical herbicides, is sometimes there are weeds that don't die. And it's important to remove those weeds via hand weeding, and there's tools that make that a lot easier, like the Fisker's tool. And we would again record data in the weed log and in the weed information management system. And then we got test results back from the soil sampling about 3 weeks later, and at that point we applied nutrients to the soil to make the soil conditions better for growing the good plants and worse for weeds. This is just a template of the weed log that we use, and this just shows the type of things that you want to note when you're conducting this trial. You want to put like what type of species are there, how many of those species, about how dense they are, like for example, how many weeds per square foot. And we can share like all this information, like the weed control plan, the weed log template, and everything like that to anybody who reaches out to us after this webinar. So when you're conducting this trial, something that's really important to making it impactful is to up the publicity around it. Get your university communications teams involved. We had the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering wrote an article about when we conducted the weed control trial, and they said, like, the student team is maintaining this plot of land outside the Mason building, so this area is weed-free without the usage of any chemicals, because these students are keeping it weed-free using natural herbicides. And that was important because it just like generates this publicity and like makes people think, for one, like, oh, do they normally use these harmful chemical herbicides? For two, they think like, oh, it's effective to use, like this can be done using better natural alternatives. We suggest reaching out to the communication teams for departments that seem like this is kind of relevant to them and like they would care, which might be like environmental science or engineering, biology, agriculture. We also suggest contacting the school newspaper and getting them to do an article on it and publicizing your sustainability website. And if you can get like the campus tour guides to take visitors actually to that area and to show them like, here's a plot of land that students are maintaining using all natural methods, that helps give the school a good image of being concerned about sustainability, and also makes them start to think about these same issues. So this slide just has a list of some of the supplies you would need for the organic weed control trial. We're not really going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I just wanted to put that up there to show you about what this takes. And we can also, during the Q&A, discuss like concerns with funding and anything like that, and how we are able to find funding if you're interested in that. And then, so the second stage of our cooperation with landscape services was trying to get them to actually use the natural herbicide in themselves. So in the first part of it, we were working on, we basically were just like using a plot of campus land, maintaining it ourselves using natural herbicide, which was good because then we were in control of that whole process. We were able to make sure it was done right. But of course, you can't have something like that forever. The ultimate goal is for landscape services to actually use the herbicide itself. So that's something that Alinka has been working a lot on. And I think she pretty much like summarized her work with that a lot earlier, but I'll pass this on to Alinka in case she wants to give you guys any more tips about how you can get landscape services to use natural herbicides at your school.
An important part of my interaction with the turf manager was firstly coming to understand that their landscaping department is very busy with things other than herbicide usage. They not only manage the campus lawn, but they have other responsibilities for the facilities department. And I was a bit insistent in getting them to try to use the herbicide and reminding them. However, I also needed to be mindful of the weather, because poor weather means likely poor results of herbicide application. So I think a key in the interaction is being aware of weather patterns, being aware of the responsibilities of the facilities department that they need to take care of before applying our herbicide. Also, mentioning to them the benefits. It is something I wish I would have done better. I did not know how the trial was going to turn out, but perhaps dwelling on how the herbicide could help the department rather than, we would like you to try it because we think, that it would be good for our project. So make it seem like a collaborative effort that they could benefit from.
All right, so next we're going to talk a little bit about other types of outreach initiatives we've conducted beyond working with landscape services and working on getting them to transition to natural herbicides. So it's important to think about, like, when you're thinking about what outreach initiatives to conduct, you got to think about like what things are already happening at your campus and what initiatives that your campus already has going on that you can connect with. For example, some questions to ask are, does your campus have a gardening club? And if they do, you can work with reach out to the gardening club and ask what they're doing for weed control. And if they're using chemical herbicides, you can explain to them this alternative solution and work, and they'll likely be pretty conducive because their members are more than likely also concerned with sustainability. Does your campus have any agriculture or gardening classes? If so, you can just set up one day of that class focusing on natural weed control, and we would be more than happy to send you a PowerPoint that you can use for a module for that and to work with you on how to teach that class session. Does your campus have an Earth Day celebration? If so, you can set, which is something we did, you can set up a booth talking about natural weed control, or even talking about an alternative is to have a booth just talking about sustainable purchasing in general, and just have a guide there of commonly used products with adverse effects and substitutes. And one of those, of course, would be Roundup, and the substitute for that would be this natural herbicide solution. And then a last question is, does your campus have connections with community or urban gardeners? Do you already have outreach programs where students go and help out those gardeners? Do you have classes for the gardeners? And if so, that's a really good opportunity to reach out to them about using sustainable weed control, and I'll talk a little bit about what we did as far as that. So we had, so we reached out to the Atlanta Community Food Bank because they have a program called the County Garden Leadership Program, through which they offer training to gardeners and assistance to gardeners in exchange for those gardeners providing food to the food bank. So it just seemed like an amazing program because the food bank was helping alleviate the problem of Atlanta being a food desert by helping gardeners to grow food sustainably. And those gardeners were also, like, in turn, like, farther addressing the food desert problem by sharing some of their food with people who couldn't afford food through the food bank. It was getting fresh produce to all these people who couldn't afford food. So a really great program. And we reached out to them and asked them if they would be willing to let us teach a class on using natural weed control methods through their program. And they were really conducive to that. So we went in and our student team, members of our student team, taught a class to these gardeners on how to use natural herbicides in the context of their gardens. And something that was really important, to remember doing this is that if you're teaching a class or giving a presentation to community gardeners, you need to think about what demographic you are presenting to. So in our case, it was a lot of elderly, low-income people so we had to make sure that we communicated at a pace that elderly people weren't confused by, that and we also had to make sure that our presentation was very tailored towards the type of weed concerns that people face in gardens. And we also focused on asking our audience questions, figuring out what weed concerns they really had, and figuring out how we could help them. We also gave them small samples of our natural herbicide solution to let them try it out, and gave them a survey we gave them a survey at that event about what they're currently doing for weed control, and then gave them a later survey about if they tried our natural herbicides, how it worked out for them compared to what they had previously been doing. Another thing that we did was so when we went to teach that class, we also gave out brochures to the gardeners there about a partnership option where we could have student teams basically go volunteer at their gardens, help out with weed control, maybe bring some of the natural herbicide solution to use. And then we also had the option of basically having a participatory research study. So what this looks like was telling gardeners, we'll give you like this amount, like a gallon of this natural herbicide solution, if you use it and document how well it works on your garden for us. And that way we're gaining data on how well this works in the real life context of community gardens. And as far as how this could work for you on your campus, one thing that y'all could do is just like set up volunteer projects for students to go help out gardeners with hand weeding. You could work with a faculty member on setting up a participatory research study where you distributed the solution to gardeners and let them see how it works for them. You could also try to set up a student team that went in, or you could have or you as sustainability professionals could go teach a class to gardeners. And then I'm going to let Alinka talk about other just like community outreach initiatives that her team did at Georgia Tech during the past year, like entering a service competition to gain some publicity, and then we will wrap up.
One thing that we try to do is set up a connection with other student or student organizations on campus that have the same goals as us. For us, this was Student Organizing for Sustainability, with whom Grace had connected previously and worked previously. They manage a community garden on campus that could benefit from some weed control. So we suggested our herbicide. We did not end up applying the herbicide this spring. However, we hope in the future we will be able to collaborate with them to help them manage the weeds in their garden. Um, like that, through this partnership, we hope that both our organization and their organization can grow, and we can learn from one another. Secondly, another outreach initiative is to speak with the campus sustainability organizations from the administration. So our campus has an Office of Sustainability that manages several initiatives, and one of the things they tried to do is help push forth um, our project, and they ended up connecting us with the campus landscaping once again, but they also offered us to connect us with entities from Atlanta who would benefit from herbicide usage from the um, Office of the Mayor, for example. We hope to connect with these people in future semesters.
Yeah, and like also on the note of our experience working with the club for sustainability, I think they also had this. I remember when we were working with this initially, they sort of had this unique need for an herbicide in the situation where they would did their garden in kind of this like weird remote area of campus that nobody wanted. And like every year before like starting to plant, they would just need to initially clear the area of like grasses and things like that. So they would use our national herbicide to initially clear the area, even though they didn't use herbicides that much throughout the growing process. All right, so that's about it as far as like what we're talking about. But if you are interested at all in working with your campus on facilitating a transition to sustainable weed control or conducting any of these outreach initiatives we talked about, please reach out to us at, I included both of our email addresses there. If you could CC both of us, that would be wonderful. We can provide you with informational materials on how to make and use natural herbicides, presentations, templates of weed control plans, and we would be super happy to help you walk through the process of how to approach your landscape services department, how to start different initiatives, and answer any questions you may have. And now we will open the floor to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grace and Ilinka. And we received a good number of questions, so I will go right to the questions. Before we start, though, I would like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions via the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. So there were some clarifying questions. Grace, are you able to share the guide to alternatives to herbicides you mentioned in the beginning of the presentation? If you are, we could include it with the archive of the webinar and the email that goes out to all attendees.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we will share that with the archive, and the link to the archive will be in the post-webinar email that you will receive tomorrow. All right, so another clarifying question was, can you explain what limonene is?
Yes, so D-limonene is an orange oil derivative. It's normally used as a food additive, so it's approved by the FDA for those purposes. It's also very commonly used in like natural cleaning substances and disinfectants and products like that. And it comes from the peel of oranges. And you can buy it. We normally buy it in bulk on Etsy, actually, which is kind of a weird source, but we can always find it on there.
All right, thank you. So would you be able to share the exact natural herbicide recipe?
Yes, so we would be happy to send out all of that information. I'll go back to, I'll bring up the slide on, so we would normally, we include recipes, I guess like alternate recipes depending on like what concentration of acetic acid vinegar you're able to find, because sometimes it's like cheaper to buy the 20% acetic acid vinegar, and sometimes it works out, it's easier to find the 10% acetic acid vinegar. But if you're using the 20%, you would mix 125 milliliters of that with 25 milliliters of pure D-limonene and 100 milliliters of water. If you're using 10%, you would mix 225 milliliters of that with 25 milliliters of D-limonene and do not need to add water because the vinegar already has water mixed with it. But if we normally use the brand Surreg Essig Essence of vinegar, which we found on Amazon, and we normally use just like, I think, pure D-limonene from Etsy. But we would be happy to email. Well, we will send data. We will send out information, a document that we have that outlines both this recipe and where different sources of obtaining these ingredients, and does analysis of the cost of all those sources and things like that. We'd be more than happy to send that out to everybody.
Thank you so much. That would be great. So also another question about the recipe. Will it hurt grass or crops?
Sorry? Will it kill grass or crops?
Yes.
Yes. So this product is intended to replace Roundup or glyphosate, which is a non-selective post-emergent herbicide. So that means that it's an herbicide that does kill everything it touches. But landscape services departments do use herbicides like that a lot, especially in cases where, like, let's say you have a sidewalk and you have weeds growing in the sidewalk. They'll use glyphosate to kill all the weeds on the sidewalk. They use glyphosate to kill or Roundup to kill all the weeds like growing around trees and pine straw areas. So it's especially well suited to those types of areas. But it also works for grassy areas and lawns because you can use a method called spot treatment, which is the method that is which is actually like the method of weed control that's recommended by the Nature Conservancy, where you only spray the herbicide on the weeds that you want to kill, which is more time consuming than broadcast application of the herbicide throughout the entire area. But it is a way to use a non-selective herbicide in grassy areas or in areas with crops without killing the grasses and crops. There's also, while the herbicide is non-selective, there are certain types of grasses that it doesn't kill as well, or that it doesn't like work as well on, and those are actually the type of grasses that normally the school wants to have there, so that it's good. But yeah, we recommend another suggestion would be, if your campus has a lot of pine straw areas that are weedy, an easier project and simpler project would be to talk to landscape services about using this herbicide on those areas where they're likely currently using Roundup.
Thank you very much. So are the roots killed, and how long is the effectiveness per each application?
Yeah, so we did a study at Georgia Tech, which is actually something I didn't include in this presentation because it was less of an outreach thing, but we did a study with a randomized complete block design on that took into account how long this lasted. So normally the weeds, you would have like all dead weeds until I think it was about like 3 or 4 weeks later. I can also, if anybody's interested in the details of this, you can contact me and I can send you the study that like details the exact, like, that has all the data on like the percentage of weeds killed at different points in time. But I think it was about a 4-week period in which the weeds would be completely dead. And this actually, we found that we are getting better results on how much you need to reapply the herbicides than people normally get on organic, than other studies have gotten on organic herbicides. So that was really encouraging. And we think that's because of the different modes of action of vinegar and of acetic acid and D-limonene and how they complement each other.
Thank you, Grace. Regarding cost, did it account for the number of applications needed to reach success?
So the number of applications needed to reach the crop?
Success. So did the cost account for how many times you apply the product until it the weeds were killed?
So the weeds are killed on the first application.
Okay.
So you only have to use, you have to use the same, I guess, quantity of our substance to kill the weeds as you would have to use of Roundup to kill the weeds.
All right. So how do we get the manager of our grounds department, who is non-caring of our precious environment, convinced that this is a good idea to switch to natural herbicides?
Yeah, so I think the main thing with that is to just try to make it as low effort for them as possible initially, and to not initially ask for too much, which is why we started with just asking, would it be okay to have a group of students maintain one area of campus? And if you're really worried about them not being receptive, you can start with something really simple, could we try to kill weeds on one area of sidewalk or something like that, where it's not even a lawn area, and just ask them if there could be a student project on one area of campus. Another great thing I think is to get, if you can get a faculty member involved, and if you can present this as sustainability research and things like that, then they tend to be a lot more conducive. And also and again, the more you're willing to put up signs, to demark, to put tape around the area and things like that, the more likely they are to be okay with it, because then they can say okay, this is students doing a research study. If this goes wrong, this doesn't reflect poorly on us, And then as far as getting them to eventually transition, I think the most important thing is to initially do the trial, showing them it's effective, so they can see okay, this actually works, and then after that, to present them with with a pretty detailed cost benefit analysis of, this would be the cost of this is how you can obtain it, we can help you obtain it, we could get sustainability grants to help sponsor this so that it actually ends up reducing your cost, and to walk through the economics of it with them, and to show them that it can actually be really feasible. And the main thing that does make that difficult right now, of course, is the fact that they would still they or you or somebody else on campus would have to be mixing up the ingredients to make the solution. And we are hoping to commercialize our product to the point so that it becomes easier to just buy it. But still, in the interim, it isn't very hard. You just mix up the two ingredients, and it can end up being less costly for them. And it can also be a really good PR move for them, because when they're talking about campus sustainability and things like that, they can say we are doing this big project to promote campus sustainability. And I think another really important thing is, when you're talking about this project, tell them that when you're talking about it, you'll always be landscape services is supporting sustainability through this. Always frame them in a positive manner and show them it's going to be a really good publicity move to them, and end up reflecting well on them instead of reflecting poorly on them. But also, just when you're sitting down to talk to them, really focus on identifying what they currently care about, what they're currently doing, and be flexible in your approach. And we're willing to provide you with we can also send you any information and data that would help in convincing landscape services that this is a good move for them to take.
Thank you so much, Grace. So somebody in attendance is asking if you could move back to the slide with the recipe where you had the percentage of vinegar, and also clarify what you said about the comparison to Roundup. Is it the same volume used, or how did you compare to Roundup?
Yeah, so in the study that we conducted, we've done multiple research studies involved in this. The first study was the one where we basically figured out okay, acetic acid and D-limonene mixed together seems really effective. So the first study was kind of preliminary. It's just oh, this seems like a good idea and this is effective. Let's try using it. And then the second study we did was at Georgia Tech, using a research grant, the President's Undergraduate Research Grant at Georgia Tech. And in that study, we had we had a randomized complete spot design experiment. We performed statistics on it. We controlled for different variables and things of that nature. And in that study, we had plots where we applied our natural herbicide, and we had plots where we applied Roundup, and we had plots where we applied a traditional organic herbicide, and we had plots without any weed control at all. So in that study, we are comparing our solution we're comparing plots where we applied our solution to plots where we applied the same volume of Roundup. And in that study, it ended up showing it was equally effective, where we were applying the same amount of our solution, the same volume of our solution as the volume of Roundup that we applied. And I would also definitely be willing to share that study with anybody who's interested.
Thank you, Grace. Can you also talk about other organic herbicides on the market and how they compare?
Yeah, so I don't remember the exact results of our study now, but I think, like, from what I remember, Nature's Avenger is the one that we focused on using as a control in our experiment, because Nature's Avenger seemed to be the organic herbicide on the market that worked the best. And from what I remember, I think we got about like 70% weed control with that versus like 99% weed control with our solution. And it's also more expensive, which is in part because I guess like they mark it up a bit to make a profit, whereas ours is just like mixtures of two ingredients without anybody marking it up. But I believe like Nature's Avenger is about, I think it was about like $20 or more than $20 per pound, and ours is about $15 per pound. I think it lasted less longer and had to be reapplied more frequently. But Nature's Avenger does have D-limonene in it, but it doesn't have acetic acid in it. There's also, if you can get, like, if your landscape services department would be willing to use Nature's Avenger, then that's great too, because it is like a non-toxic herbicide solution. But just like there is a little bit more difficulty in getting them to use that because it is more expensive and hasn't been shown to be quite as effective without reapplication. But if they'll use it, then that's great. It's an organic herbicide.
Thank you, Grace. And we're at our last question, but we have a couple more minutes, so I encourage our audience, if they still have questions, to submit them now. So Grace, you talked a little bit about getting the students engaged and also partnering with the faculty, but maybe can you talk a little bit more of how this project can be used on the academic side and engagement with students?
Yeah, so are you talking, can I clarify what the question's more about, how it can be used, like how we can get students engaged in research about natural herbicides, or if it's more about how we can teach classes about how to use sustainable weed control methods in natural herbicides?
Yeah, it's on the class side.
Yeah, so on the class side, I think the important thing is to look at like what types of programs your school currently offers, and if it would make sense to fit in a module on a class or a module on organic weed control into those programs. So at Georgia Tech, we have, I think I briefly mentioned this, but I'll describe it in more detail. So Georgia Tech has a program called the Excel program, and the Excel program provides basically like occupational classes to students with learning disabilities, and one of those classes is a gardening class, teaching students gardening skills. So so how we approached that is we first contacted the person who is the coordinator of the Excel program, the entire special needs educate occupational program, and we talked to her about hey, we would like to be able to teach a class to this we would like to be able to teach a class about this as part of y'all's gardening program. And then she put us in contact with the course instructor, and we basically we worked to create a PowerPoint that was very geared towards that audience. So we used language that was very clear, and we also really focused on the safety aspects and how natural herbicides would be more safe, because in that they're really concerned about the safety of these students. So we created a presentation geared towards that audience. We sent it to the professor for approval, and then we came up with this plan to we basically, like, the professor let us come in and teach a class. And during the first part of the class, we showed the presentation. And during the second part of the class, we took the students out to a garden area and let them try using the natural herbicide solution. So that's what I recommend doing is first, see if you have a class or a program this could fit well into. Like, for example, if you have like any classes related to agriculture, it would be a good fit. If you have if you have classes on sustainability, you could have a course section. You could have like a day focused on this. And another thing that I recommend is having half the class session just like a presentation talking about like how to make the herbicide, like why use it, other organic weed control methods. So for the first half, have an informational presentation, and then have the second half be hands-on, where you actually have students try to like mix up the herbicide, go outside, try it, try other organic weed control stuff. And I think this will look a little bit different depending on like who your audience is and like what class it's a part of. But again, we would be very willing to work with y'all if you like contact us and say like, hey, we have a class on fill in the blank and want to make this a part of our class, then we'd be more than happy to help you develop a course module that makes sense for that class and a plan of how to teach a class on this. And as far as like getting professors on board with it, I think it's really a matter of just like reaching out to professors and say like, hey, we have an idea for a module of your class if you have any extra time in your class, and then explain to them why this is valuable, why it fits with their goals, and getting them to work on it.
Thank you, Grace. We received another question. How can we connect with other universities and colleges to implement the use of natural herbicides? And I'll actually take this one, and I'll recommend using the AASHE community or AASHE Connect. That's community.aashe.org, which is for the AASHE members a place to connect and discuss topics of interest. And you could start a thread on natural herbicides and find others who are working on this or have an interest in this topic. And we are actually at time, so the two questions that we received, maybe briefly you can tell us, Grace, is this applied as a spray in a spray bottle?
So you can use literally like, if you want to be really fancy, you can use like a backpack pesticide applicator, but those are expensive. So what we did for a lot of the project is you can go to Target and buy like $1 spray bottles, and those work. So you can use a $1 spray bottle.
All right, great. And how many total hours would students spend on this project, or per week or term?
It depends on how big of an area. Like if you're doing a weed control trial, it's going to depend on how large of an area you're doing and how many students you have. But I guess, for example, we had like this, I don't remember the dimensions of the area we worked on, but it was probably about the size of like maybe a little bit larger than a typical like lawn area, like just like a typical lawn of somebody's home. And I think it's important to have students out there 3 days a week to make sure that the area is maintained to high quality standards. But we had a team of about like, I think at that point our team was about like 4 or 5 students, and we were basically able to have like each student spend about an hour out there or like 2 hours out there per week. So if you have, I guess, enough students engaged, then it's pretty easy to like break down the labor into manageable portions. But I think for just like a normal medium-sized lawn area, you're going to need in total probably you're going to need students spending 30 minutes to an hour on Monday, 30 minutes to an hour. I would say like probably an hour to be safe, like an hour and a half on Monday, an hour and a half on Wednesday, and the same amount of time on Friday.
Thank you so much. And I will briefly mention our next webinar taking place next Wednesday, because actually it could tie into your project. The webinar titled Accelerating Change Through the President's Sustainability Research Program will showcase Swarthmore's program, which promotes sustainable change by positioning students as change leaders, engages the campus, and advances campus sustainability priorities. So through one of this program, you could conduct research on natural herbicides, perhaps. So I'm hoping that you will join us next week for this webinar. And I would like to thank our presenters again for sharing your expertise with us, and to everyone for attending. Thank you so much and have a great day.